Last week, the Prog School passed 25,000 subscribers. Thank you so much to everyone who's subscribed and enjoyed what I've done here on this channel. And I thought in celebration of 25K, I would do a fun video and rank all of the Dream Theater albums. Now, I've done rankings of Symphony X albums and Between the Buried and Me. I think those are the only bands at this point. This isn't the type of thing I usually do on this channel, but I thought a fun, easy video this week would be in order. I'm going to be back to my regular videos next week. I wanted to give myself a little bit of a break and do a fun video in the meantime. But if you enjoy what I do here on this channel, I do have a Patreon and a channel membership. There's sheet music from all of my lessons on there, as well as early access to all of my videos. If you want to help support me as the channel continues to grow, that's a great way to do it. I'm also available for private lessons if you want some more in-depth personal instruction. You can check all the links to that in this video's description. So for this album ranking, I'm doing just the studio albums, and I don't have a Change of Seasons on here. I love that song, one of my favorite Dream Theater songs, but that's not really a proper full album. So I have just the 16 studio albums here. So I'm going to go from my least favorite album to my favorite album, and I'm going to put these in tiers because that way you can see how I actually feel about these albums. Just because an album ranks low doesn't mean I don't like it. In fact, most of these albums for me are S, A, or B. There's just a few that fall below that. So let's get into it. So at the very bottom, and this should surprise nobody, is The Astonishing. I think that's probably at the bottom of most people's lists. Now, before I get into the things I don't like about this album, let me give it a little bit of praise. I do like that Dream Theater went for something different here. A lot of Dream Theater's newer albums are just kind of paint by numbers. It's just like stock Dream Theater. There's nothing really too special in there. And you're going to see a lot of the newer albums towards the bottom of my list. And I do appreciate that they tried to do something big here, a big epic scope of an album, a story, something less metal and more melodic focused. And I really do enjoy that side of Dream Theater, the more melodic ballad side of Dream Theater. But for me, there's just too much of that on here. So my main problems with this album are it's too long, way too long. I think this could be trimmed a ton. There's a lot of filler, a lot of just random piano ballads. I don't even know the names of half of these songs because there's just so many here. The production is not good, and it doesn't really serve the story well. The drums are super sterile, and a lot of these early Mangini records have really bad drum sounds, but it does not work with the kind of music they're doing here at all. And there's just not enough energy in the album. As I said, there's too many slow parts. It needs more energetic songs, and the songs that I do like from this album are more energetic. Songs like The Gift of Music or Moment of Betrayal. Like, there's a few songs in here I think are good. And in fact, I think there is a pretty good hour-long album somewhere in here. It's just bogged down in so much filler. And the other thing I really don't like about it is how cheesy it is. Now, Dream Theater, part of their music is cheese, and I do like cheesy music. I mean, I listen to nerdy prog rock, right? I mean, there's definitely a cheese element to a lot of that. But there's just something about this that is cheesy in the wrong way, like so on the nose with the names like Lord Nefarious and characters like Hope and Faith. It's just so in your face, and like the gift of music, like powering everything, and or the music conquering all. You know, I'm probably butchering the story. I don't really even know this album that well because I listened through it like once and I was like, man, that is rough. And I haven't really listened all the way through since. Actually, if you'd like, I had a good live stream idea. It would be to live stream me listening through the whole of The Astonishing again, since it's been 10 years since it came out. If you want to see me suffer, if you want to suffer along with me, let me know if you think that's a good idea. But The Astonishing goes at the very bottom. It's kind of an easy pick for me. All right, next up is the one right before The Astonishing, and that is the self-titled Dream Theater album from 2013. And this one has kind of the opposite problem from The Astonishing. This one feels just too paint by numbers. Like, there's just nothing interesting here. I think The Enemy Inside is a pretty good song. That's maybe my favorite run from this album, but nothing else stands out. Like, I couldn't even tell you what half these songs sound like. I think The Looking Glass is like the Rush ripoff one. And this one has maybe the worst drum sound out of all the Dream Theater albums. It's just not a very interesting album. There's just not much here and not much that's memorable at all. So that goes in D tier. I think I kind of enjoy it though. It still has like some of those heavy Dream Theater elements, and there's good solos and all of that. I think The Astonishing is the only album that I really just don't enjoy. Now, next, we're going to go to C tier, and we've got When Dream and Day Unite, their first album. Now, this is an interesting one because I think there's a lot of good music on here, but it suffers from being their first album and also having a different singer. So the production is pretty low, right? They didn't have a ton of money at this time, and they're just trying to get their foot in the door. And they also have Charlie Dominici singing instead of James Labrie. And his voice is great, but it doesn't really work for their music that well. There are some really good songs on here. I mean, Yet I Jam is a classic. That is an awesome instrumental. I do really like A Fortune in Lies. I think that's a great song. Afterlife, I love the live version of that from the Score DVD. Only a Matter of Time. So there are good songs on here, but it also kind of sounds like a band still trying to find themselves, right? Trying to find their sound exactly. And they didn't have the right singer and just didn't quite blend together the way I think they probably wanted it to. But that's the case for a lot of bands when they first start. It's just not perfect, right? And they have to kind of grow into their sound. But it's a good album, and there are some really good songs on here. It's just not one I come back to that often. Next in the C tier, we have A View from the Top of the World. I'm going to put these this way. So if I like it more, it's on the left side. Hopefully it's not too confusing. Now, this is another album that feels kind of like they're self-titled, a little bit paint by numbers, but there are some songs in here that I really enjoy. Answering the Call specifically, I think, is one of the best Mangini-era Dream Theater songs. That song is awesome from start to finish. But there's a lot of kind of just generic Dream Theater songs in here that don't stand out to me at all. Songs like Invisible Monster, Awaken the Master. I know it's cool to use the 8-string on that and whatever, but just nothing that memorable here. Even The Alien, I know they won a Grammy for that, but I'm actually not that big of a fan of The Alien. It does have some cool rhythmic stuff. The Epic's pretty good, but also I couldn't tell you a single section from that song. And I did listen to this album at least a couple of times when it first came out. But it's a fair, fine album, but absolutely nothing special. Now, we're going to go to B tier, and one album earlier with Distance Over Time. I have a lot of the same thoughts on this album as I do about A View from the Top of the World, but this one I think just has better songs overall. It still does feel like kind of generic late era Dream Theater, but there's some good songs in here, specifically At Wit's End and Pale Blue Dot. I like those songs a lot. I think they're good. Barstool Warriors, one they do a lot live. Great song. I heard them play it last time. So there are some good songs here, and I think they went for more shorter songs on this album, which is, I think, a good idea, because this day and age, I don't know if they have the ideas to carry long songs. Anytime they've done epic songs past Black Clouds and Silver Linings, I haven't enjoyed them too much, although I guess there was a few on Dramatic Turn of Events that I like. But like really long songs, the 20-minute songs, they've done a few of those in their later albums, and I just don't think they work nearly as well as they did on their earlier albums. But this is a good album, and as I said, kind of more like straight in your face. And I will say the production is a much better on this album and A View from the Top of the World. I think Mangini's drum sound is considerably better. Everything sounds just clearer and crisper. So it has that going for it as well. But this is a pretty good album, right? It's up in B tier, but it's nothing too special. Next up, we've got Parasomnia, their latest album. And this one was kind of a disappointment to me. I was hoping with Mike Portnoy back in the band, we were going to get some more of that fire back into their sound, something different, that he'd bring some of those different influences back in. Because I've actually enjoyed a lot of the things that Portnoy's done when he was outside of Dream Theater. I think specifically the Neil Morse Band. I think there's a lot of really interesting and much more unique music in that project and a few of his other projects than Dream Theater did during that same period. So I was hoping we were going to get some more of that, but it just feels like more generic Dream Theater. It doesn't even feel that different from the last couple of Mangini albums, which is a little frustrating. I'm hoping as they go forward, they'll bring back some of the more interesting songs. I'm ranking this one above the last couple of Mangini albums just because of Bend the Clock. I really like that song. When I heard it, I was thinking, oh wow, this is something a little bit interesting and original. It kind of sounds more like the older Dream Theater, and I'm hoping they do more of that going forward. I do actually like the epic a little bit more than some of their previous epics to the Shadow Man Incident. I think that's pretty good. But there's a lot of stuff here that's just kind of like, whatever, even Night Terror, which I did a full analysis on. I don't know. It's not that terribly interesting. A Broken Man, Midnight Messiah. These are all songs that just kind of like in one ear, out the other as I listen to them. Not a bad album, and there's some good parts to it, but definitely not a great album. And lastly, in B tier, we've got A Dramatic Turn of Events, the first album with Mike Mangini. And this one has always been my favorite from the Mike Mangini era. And in fact, this one I think would have ranked a bit higher a few years ago. This is one I really enjoyed when it first came out. At that point, I was still a pretty big Dream Theater fan, and I kind of like waited for each new release. So there's a lot of songs in here I really enjoy. This one does suffer from some production things. The drums are very weak on this album. And that's not really Mangini's fault. He kind of came in, and I don't even think he wrote most of these parts. But there are some really good songs on here. I think the best Mangini era song, at least my favorite, is Breaking All Illusions. I really like Bridges in the Sky. On the Backs of Angels is good. So there are some actual like good songs in here that I listen to every once in a while when I go back to Dream Theater. But there's also some kind of filler stuff here too. Not a big fan of Build Me Up, Break Me Down, or This Is the Life. Just kind of like whatever. And this is a super long album too. I think probably too long. But there is some really interesting stuff on here and a couple of good songs. So A Dramatic Turn of Events tops out the B tier. Now the rest of these are going to be S and A tier. So these are albums that I really like, right? They're, 90% and above. So at the bottom of A tier, we're going to have Black Clouds and Silver Linings. This is one that I also think would have been higher for me a few years ago, or when it came out, because I was a massive Dream Theater fan at the time. And of course, this is the last one with Portnoy before he left. But this is kind of an up and down album for me. This has some really high parts and then some stuff that's just like, whatever, a very inconsistent album. Obviously, The Count of Tuscany is a classic. People love that song. It's not my favorite Dream Theater epic, but it is a great song. I love the first half of A Nightmare to Remember. I think if they had kept the vibe of the first half through the whole song, that could be like a top 20 Dream Theater song for me. Kind of fades off towards the end of that song. But there's also filler in here like A Rite of Passage and Wither. I don't really care for those songs much. The Shattered Fortress is good. I think it's a good ending to the 12-step suite. Not my favorite of the suite, but it works fine. And The Best of Times is a good song too. Maybe too long. In fact, a lot of these songs might be too long. But this is a good album. It has some really high points to me. Just has some kind of lower stuff bringing it down too. Next in A tier, we got Systematic Chaos. This is one that's probably a lot higher for a lot of people. For me, I don't know how well this one is aged. This one is more consistent, I think, than Black Clouds throughout. There's a few low points, like I don't care for Forsaken much or Prophets of War, but there are some really good songs on here. The Presence of Enemies, especially part 1, is awesome. I think that is like probably a top 20, 30 Dream Theater song for me. The Dark Eternal Night is fun. It's got the really heavy riffing. I do like Repentance. I think it's a really nice ballad and the beautiful solo in there. And even in The Presence of Enemies part 2 is good as well. I think they should have like put these together as one song. I don't know why they did the Pink Floyd thing and split them up. But this is a much more consistent album across the board than Black Clouds, but still has a few low points for me. Next, we've got, I think, a very underrated Dream Theater album, and that's Falling Into Infinity. This is also very much an up and down album for me, but I think the high points of this album are among the best things that Dream Theater's ever done. Peruvian Skies, Lines in the Sand, Hell's Kitchen even, and Trial of Tears. Those are incredible songs. A couple of those would make my top 20 or 30 for sure. But this album notoriously has some songs that people hate too. Songs like You Not Me and Burning My Soul. I don't know if I hate those songs, but they're just not great. And you can feel like the studio influence on some of that stuff. But I enjoy Hollow Years, for example. I think it's a good ballad. I particularly like the Budokan version with the crazy extended solo by Petrucci. There's just some not so great stuff on here that keeps it from being like a top tier Dream Theater album. I think there's a version of this album that exists that is an S tier album to me. If the record label wasn't so heavily involved, if they had Metropolis Part 2 on here like they originally thought, if some of this like filler stuff was gone, this could easily be an S tier album. But as it is, I think an underrated album, but one that doesn't quite make it up to the S tier. And our final album in A tier is Octavarium. This is another one that I probably would have put higher when it first came out. This was the first Dream Theater album that released after I was a fan, and I loved this album. I played the crap out of it. I went and watched them on this tour in California. I flew all the way from Alaska to California when I was 18 to watch them on the Score tour. And this is another album that feels very kind of hit and miss to me, but the high points of this album are like, super high. Things like Panic Attack and, of course, Octavarium. I kind of go back and forth on whether I like A Change of Seasons or Octavarium more. I think A Change of Seasons tops it a little bit, but not by much. Octavarium is an incredible song, one of their best epics. And Panic Attack, of course, is a classic now, one of their best songs and one of their favorite songs for most people. I also really like These Walls and The Root of All Evil, but it does have a couple of low points like I Walk Beside You. I'm not a huge fan of Never Enough, it's okay. And even Sacrifice Sons, I'm not the biggest fan of, but it is a pretty good song. So this is another one that could have easily been S tier if it just had a couple of tweaks to it. But it is a good album, and it has like a really nice variety to it between some of the heavier stuff and then some of the softer stuff. So these top 5 albums are all in S tier, which means I think they're perfect or close to perfect. And ordering these was tough. A lot of people are going to disagree with my order, but I have my own bias based on the era of Dream Theater that I started listening to. So at 5 is Awake, and this one I struggled with. I feel like I definitely could have put this a couple spots higher, but that's just what I was feeling at the time. And as I said, I think all of these albums are basically perfect, and Awake is incredible. Awake has such a unique sound in their catalog. They really started to bring in the heavy stuff, the 7-string, but they still had those old school proggy moments. And of course, they improved the sound, I think, from Images and Words. This is a better sounding album, especially in the drum department. But there's some absolute classics on here. And I basically love every song on this album. Scarred is amazing. I remember learning that solo. I should relearn that. That's a good one. Even Space Divest, I really like that song. Of course, you have A Mind Beside Itself trilogy, Erotomania, Voices, Silent Man. Those are all awesome, especially Voices. Caught in a Web, Innocence Faded. The end of Innocence Faded with that whole kind of composed guitar solo part is so amazing. And you have the heavy stuff with The Mirror and Lie. This is an absolutely incredible album. And I'm trying to talk myself out of putting this higher. But as it is, this is going to be in 5th place. But it's in the S tier, so you know how I feel about it. Next, this is also going to be controversial. I'm going to put Images and Words at number 4. I probably should have this one higher too. There's not much that needs to be said about Images and Words. I mean, it's a classic. It's probably the most important progressive metal album of all time, or one of them for sure. Once again, every song on here is incredible. And I really like some of the songs that maybe aren't as talked about. Songs like Surrounded, even like Another Day a lot. In fact, Metropolis isn't even my favorite song from this album. Learning to Live is. And actually, Learning to Live is my favorite Dream Theater song ever. So there you go. Obviously, there's some awesome, incredible stuff on here. This is a classic album. Maybe my least favorite song is actually Pull Me Under, because I feel like it's maybe more generic than the other ones. But I don't really even need to talk about this album much. In fact, a few years ago, I did a song ranking of this album with my friend Peter Arulian. You can check that out on the channel. Maybe I'll link that down below if you want to see more of my thoughts on this album specifically. But of course, Images and Words is an absolute classic. In 3rd place, I'm going to put 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. I think this is the most underrated Dream Theater album. And of course, this is the era of Dream Theater that I grew up with and kind of love the most. But I think this is Dream Theater's most experimental album, and in a good way. They tried all kinds of interesting stuff on this album. I think almost all of it worked perfectly. I love the whole 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence song or suite of songs. That's all incredible. And actually very ballad heavy, right, and more orchestrated. And this is like an example of good orchestration by Dream Theater. Like, whereas The Astonishing didn't work for me, a song like 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence works perfectly. And I think there's so much interesting harmonic language happening in that song. And you have the heavy moments, which are cool. And you also have a lot of these big epic moments in the softer ballads. And then the first disc, I might like even more than the second disc. The Glass Prison and Blind Faith are both top 10 Dream Theater songs for me. Absolutely incredible. Blind Faith, I think, is maybe their most underrated song ever, although people do tend to like that song. But Misunderstood, such an interesting song. The Great Debate and Disappear, they're all very different from each other, and they're trying a lot of different things with sounds, and it just is such an interesting album to me. Absolutely one of my favorites, and I think, as I said, their most underrated album. In 2nd place, I'm going to put Train of Thought, and this is very much a bias based on when I started listening to Dream Theater. So this was the first Dream Theater album I ever heard. It's the album that got me into prog. It's the whole reason that this channel even exists is this album. So there definitely is a bias that way. But this is heavy Dream Theater done right. This is heavy Dream Theater, the best version of heavy Dream Theater, where it doesn't feel forced, like they're just trying to force the heaviness, where you kind of get that on some of their later albums. This feels like them just going balls to the wall like they had done in the previous albums, but just making a whole album like that. This has probably the most insane guitar playing from Petrucci 2, which of course I enjoy. This Dying Soul, love that song. So energetic and crazy all the way through. As I Am even is a classic. Probably my favorite song from this album is actually Stream of Consciousness. I think that's the best Dream Theater instrumental, or at least my favorite Dream Theater instrumental. And In the Name of God is an absolute classic. And my least favorite song on this album is probably Honor Thy Father, but even that song is great and features some of the heaviest riffs that Dream Theater's ever done. This is an awesome album from start to finish. It just hits you in the face with the heaviness, but it still has those proggy elements. It has the epic moments, has incredible playing from everybody. Just one of my personal favorite albums of all time. So it had to rank super high on here. I know it probably deserves to be lower. I think for most people, they'd put Images and Words in Awake above Train of Thought and 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. And as I said, these are all S tier, so I kind of went back and forth on all of them. But this is where my ranking is, just based on my personal opinion. And of course, to probably no one's surprise, Scenes from Memory is at the very top. And this is, I think, arguably Dream Theater's best album. I think people go between this and Images and Words probably. For me, this has always been my favorite Dream Theater album. And everything that The Astonishing did wrong, this album did right. So it's epic, has an incredible story. It has a lot of themes that repeat throughout, but it's not boring. It's not overly long. It doesn't feel super cheesy. And it has basically everything you'd want from a Dream Theater album. It has the heaviness, has the technicality, has the prog, it has the ballads and the melodies. It has the story. It has the epicness. It has all of that in one Dream Theater album. This is like the ultimate Dream Theater album and one of the most important progressive metal albums ever, and one of the best concept albums ever as well. It's even hard to talk about these songs individually because it's such an album that needs to be listened to kind of straight through, at least in my opinion. But songs like Fatal Tragedy and Beyond This Life, Home, The Spirit Carries On, Finally Free, Overture 1928. I mean, every single song on this album is absolutely incredible. And even the more filler, slower moments are really nice and beautiful. I do really like Through Her Eyes and Through My Words, although that's kind of like part of Fatal Tragedy, One Last Time. And of course, The Dance of Eternity, kind of their quintessential instrumental song. It's not my favorite instrumental Dream Theater song, but it's a really good one. There's just no way this couldn't be at the top. And I think for most people, this would probably be at the top as well. I think it's the perfect example of everything that Dream Theater does well in one album. All right, so there is my tier ranking. I'm curious what your ranking would be. Let me know in the comments. You can put them in order. You can put them in tiers, however you want. I thought it'd be fun to put it in a tier so you can kind of see how I actually feel about these albums. You can see how top heavy this is, right? Almost all of their albums are S, A, or B. In fact, the S and A are the biggest categories here. So there's not many Dream Theater albums I don't like, right? This is one of my favorite bands of all times. At one point, they were my favorite band, without question, right? Even if they keep putting out the same album over and over till the end of their career, what they've done in their heyday makes them one of the most important progressive metal bands ever, and one of my personal favorites. So, as I said, let me know in the comments what your rankings would be for this album, and I'll be back next week with some normal lesson videos for you. Until then, stay proggy.